All right. Welcome to another episode of the Aetherica podcast. Today, joined with Ike Baker as well
Yeah.
as Drew McKinnon. So this is going to be a fun one. How are you guys doing today?
Doing good, bro. How are you? How are you, Ike?
Doing excellent.
Doing great, doing great. I'm glad to be here with you fellows.
It's good to see you guys on screen. The last time we met was in person. What was that, a month ago or so?
Yes, it was a month ago. Yep.
Yes.
That
Pete is
was nice.
currently down with the sickness.
Always,
So
always,
Yeah.
always preferable to meet in person. Yeah, I've been struggling with COVID for about, I'm at the tail end of it, hopefully. I'm going on 2 weeks now. So, but it makes my voice more raspy and sensual.
Yeah, I was like, you're probably gonna get like hey, can you do an audiobook? I really like this. I got a project for you. It's kind of Nosferatu, can you just bring me there, Bram Stoker?
I mean, that's basically how I got my last audiobook project was just being raspy and gravelly on the microphone.
the Michael Osborne one, is that the
Yeah.
Oh,
We're
that's so
actually gonna
rad.
we're doing another one too. We're gonna do another book of his. We're gonna start that up probably in the next couple of months, but I don't want to say which book it is yet because I don't know if he's if he wants me to reveal that. So
Sweet. Well, that one was the treatise on the reintegration of beings that you did do, right? The Pasquale.
yes, his Michael R. Osborne's translation of Martina de Pasquale's treatise.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So before we started, we were kind of jumping into, we're talking a little bit about Blavatsky, some of the Eastern movement stuff. Drew had brought up some of the interesting stuff that he was looking at in terms of researching Gandhi. I don't know. Do you want to jump in with that, Drew, and kind of
Yeah,
throw
we can
some?
just kind of just throw some different things around because the connection, I know yourself, Sky, were interested in that part of history, right? So you got like the 1850s up until, the early 1900s with the Ike's Golden Dawn a bit more, but the names and people recognize Gandhi as this massive figure, which was for Indian independence and the things that he did. But many don't understand the connections that he had to the occult and different philosophy. And I'm sure we're all on the same page. Like the mainstream idea of occult is just so dark. Whereas if when you study what they're treating as a cult, it's more so, philosophy and different commentaries on different books. And Ike and I were talking a little bit about Allan Bennett, whom was a major influence to Aleister Crowley. And Allan Bennett was a member of the Golden Dawn. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ike. In the late, I want to say late, was he? I think he was probably initiated in late 1890s or somewhere around there.
Yeah,
Not
late,
exactly
late.
sure,
Yep.
but he is recognized as the first or main influences of bringing Buddhism to the West in the late 1800s and into the early 1900s. And he had lived a pretty messed up life. He was always poor. He had health issues his whole life, and he was able to travel to Southeast Asia, and he studied all the ancient texts. When he went back to England, he brought back. He was ordained a monk at that. So you can imagine we're all thinking when you look at the Victorian period of England, and you got a guy coming back as a monk basically and being like, hey, I'm going to teach you guys about Buddha and all writings and texts. So that whole time, the East philosophy was just the movement of that revival period really hadn't happened in that time in history up until obviously I know we all kind of talk about history in a way where it's like everything's been repeated. So it's like this was the 200-year anniversary of that, avatar or that person coming around and sharing that information. It's kind of like Pythagoras. There's been a million Pythagoras, right? So if you want to,
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. The impetus for a lot of that stuff actually happens, and I'm glad you brought up Gandhi because this is one of my favorite aspects about the occult. And looking at the movements that we would consider in modern parlance occultism or esotericism, and seeing how they are the core impetus for all of exoteric history, all of it. Through working on this book, A Formless Fire, it was a pretty ambitious project that I kind of pitched. It was like, the guys from Tria Prima approached me and they were like, "Hey, do you want to write a book?" And I was like, "Sure. What do you want me to write about?" And they're like, "Whatever you want." So of course I'm like, "All right, I want to write about everything." So starting, as far back as you can go in, like in Sumer and Babylonia and all the Mesopotamian astrological sort of really astrotheological sort of stuff, and then moving forward to the modern day. I mean, it has all, Mahatma Gandhi was an attending member of the Theosophical Society. I mean, even somebody like Adolf Hitler was a member of the Thule Society, an
That's
occult order.
crazy.
All of these fucking people have been members of these orders. And that's why people point to it and they're like, "Oh, it's a conspiracy." It's not a conspiracy, because it's not all one unified thing and we don't all believe in the same stuff. But the people who end up doing stuff in the world have a spiritual cause.
Background, yeah.
Yeah, they have their motive for this stuff. Their motivation transcends, and I'm talking about real deal stuff, change the course of history. I'm not talking about get a deal with Nike. I'm talking about like actual historical stuff, not like America in the modern day. We've just got this head full of ambition and bullshit and consumerism that's been projected onto us. But before the advent of mass media, people did things because they cared. And and not completely out of self-interest. And I think that really at a certain level, at a certain strata of public, I want to say, notoriety or appearance, there was a little bit more of a meritocracy because don't get me wrong, I mean, people have always been doing things for selfish reasons, but I think it got, that became really, really heightened and really, really kind of it became the norm rather than the exception, I think, in a lot of senses nowadays. But you look at somebody like Mahatma Gandhi, who was attending theosophical meetings in India when they put their headquarters there in Adyar, India. And Blavatsky, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, she was really the first person to bring the Vedic stuff. And really, we think of Buddhism and we think we think of, and by we I mean like the mainstream popularity thinks of like little bald Asian men in robes and things like that. And but in reality it was an Indian thing well before it penetrated into China, and those it was a South Asian thing. And then supposedly, Bodhidharma brought what he called jhana, which they termed Zen. And he brought these philosophies and essentially to the Chinese and to the Far East. But you have somebody like Blavatsky starting to bring it west. And the thing is, it was at a really interesting time. You have the Egyptomania that was going on because Egypt, the interior of Egypt, had been opened up to archaeologists, primarily from Britain and France, but from all over Europe. And they went in and they were rediscovering and retranslating all this stuff. And so, a big portion, if you look at the mystery traditions of the West, particularly the Golden Dawn, which happened after Theosophy and was highly, highly intertwined with it and influenced by it. I mean, Westcott eulogized Blavatsky to his local Theosophical chapter, of which, they were all members, the founding members of the Golden Dawn. But she's, you look at those Western esoteric orders and they're mired in Egyptology and the Egyptian mysteries. And what Blavatsky sought to do was she wanted to relocate the center of authority, or the spirit, the origin of spiritual impetus in the West. She wanted to take it. I mean, I don't know if it was her explicit intention, but it's de facto what she did was she took the origin of the ancient mysteries, and she removed them and said, no, 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 it's over here in the East. And her books were so incredibly like unfathomably popular. People don't realize this. It gets whitewashed out of history. That like Helena Blavatsky changed the world. And
Changed the world. Yeah.
she really did. And then from there, you start seeing a lot of interest by way of people through the Golden Dawn. You get even, it opens up the floodgates for yogis to come over, like Paramahansa Yogananda, and then somebody like Swami Vivekananda, who he has much more of an audience. You just see that the rise of guruship. And the last thing that I want to kind of like make a note on that, just because I'm fresh on this stuff, because like I said, I've been writing this book, and this in a large part, the final chapter entails a lot of this stuff. But she exotifies it. She makes spirituality exotic. We had been living in this age of like, we were just out of the industrial age. Things were rapidly changing in ways that we see now. Things are changing with the advent of like AI and things like that. It like they were having similar massive changes being done to their foundational reality. And she wanted to, or she did, again, I cannot speak to her private motivations, but she did sort of she began this trend of the exotification of spirituality that we've been kind of following suit with for the past 200 plus years. Is like, we think we go to yoga and we go to Zen, and before we'll ever, most of us will ever go to like somebody like Agrippa. We'll start out with Deepak Chopra over him.
You just painted such a beautiful picture there with how the impact that it had at that time was so insane. And there was a couple books that I wanted to mention, and there was a writer that influenced so many of these occultists, and I hate using that term occultist. I think researcher. I just think somebody that's maybe just not satisfied with the status quo, maybe wants to pick up the book that's not being handed to them, right? And there was a writer from the 1800s, and his name was Sir Edwin Arnold. And he wrote two very prolific books, one of which I can highly recommend to anybody that's interested in the Dharma, kind of teachings and allegories, called The Light of Asia. And that book, Mahatma Gandhi regarded as one of the most important books he ever read. And he was a major influence of Allan Bennett as well. When you research Allan Bennett from the Golden Dawn, he revered Sir Edwin Arnold as like the pinnacle of his influence. That's kind of what set him on that to the East. And the book, The Light of Asia, is basically his commentary. He was a poet on the Buddhist teachings, and it's beautiful. And he did another one that's called The Song Celestial, and that basically is talking about the Vedics, the Mahabharata, right? Yep. So you have the Bhagavad Gita, and then in the Bhagavad Gita is a small part of the Mahabharata. So those poems are so poetic, and you will, when you are researching Sir Edwin Arnold and the names that come up with connections to these poems and these pieces, you have Annie Besant. I think
Annie Besant. Yep.
She was another one that was a pioneer of women's rights in the late 1800s. She moved to India, she lived in India, and she fought for women's rights in India. So like I said, with history, we're all like, nowadays, when people, they say this is the first person to do that, the whole purpose behind that is like a marketing tool, right? It's like everybody's like, oh, you get a Subway sandwich because this is the first person to do this. It's like, yo, that shit got done 150 years ago, bro.
Yeah.
So you look at what these women were doing in these movements, to where I know Ike as a practitioner, and myself and Sky as well. You always getting the finger point at you, this, that, and that. I'm like, when you really look at it as a whole, what was going on, it was a very beautiful, free space for people to share spirituality together. And that is what has been like you know, when you see the pioneers of that, and then you see the revival. And right now we can kind of segue into this if you guys want. I call it the revival that's happened since COVID, right? And you look what happened to people and where the direction of magic is gone, and you're starting to see the same people, the same figures, or the same avatar or archetypes, may I say, of people that are coming up, as maybe they're doing it this way or they're doing it that way. But it's like I said, it's very interesting how history repeats itself, and then you can see the archetypes of certain things, and there's little puzzle pieces that you can grab across the way. And I always tell people, if you're coaching somebody in magic or you're teaching somebody, it's interesting how your research, and I'm sure it's the same way for both you guys, it will kind of lead you where you thought you would end up. Does that make sense? When you're studying ancient Greece or you're studying ancient Egypt, you'd be like, I have a theory about Zosimos. And it's weird how your research will end you where your theory was already kind of going. That is kind of a thing that I've been noticing, especially with the Vedics or Vedanta, the end of knowledge. And that is just the Vedanta, for anybody who doesn't know, it's just you're having a lot of commentaries on the Vedas as a whole, whether it's Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda's influence was Ramakrishna. And Ramakrishna, basically, Swami Vivekananda took the teachings of his guru to the world, because Ramakrishna, the guy before him, was like, yo, I just want to stay in India and I don't want to do any of that. So you're seeing a lot of the same teachings being taught. And that's part of me where the occult, you'll get, you know, it's a system, you know, the initiatory systems are like, there's such a legacy to it all. So when we're talking about these writers and these prolific writers, whether it's Sir Edwin Arnold, look at the guys he influenced. You have Allan Bennett, who influenced Aleister Crowley and a number of other people. And it just kind of that trickle down effect. So I just thought that was something I'd like to share with you guys.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Bennett's the whole reason Crowley went east also, you know, because he had, they had a very like Greek friendship, you know, like ancient Greek, like kind of like, you know, there was a certain level of admiration that bordered on, you know, the romantic in the case of Crowley. Crowley really romanticized Bennett, and he literally dropped everything to leave and go to the East. And you know, obviously he came back pretty disillusioned because Crowley was a man who couldn't do what the teachings required of him. And when he found out that was the case, he blamed the teachings instead of himself. But what I see going on nowadays, yes, absolutely, history is repeating itself, and it always will. But it's kind of like primary colors. You start somewhere and you've got like you've got primary colors. So these are the basic ingredients. Okay. And let's just say, for the sake of our analogy, they manifest as a triad: red, blue, and yellow. Now, what happens is you end up with another triad, right? Another pattern that is similar to the primaries, but contains a permutation of them. So you get red and blue mixed together and they make purple. You get red and yellow, and you've got what? Green? No, orange. And then blue and yellow make green. So now you've got this purple, green, orange thing, and it's another triad, and it's of these specific distinct colors, but they're slightly different because the previous factors permutated with one another and now create a similar pattern, but not exactly the same. And the reason why I say this is because I do see a lot of innovation, and I see a lot of people coming to the fore to talk about certain things and share space. And the only thing that I'm noticing that is probably different from the way it's different from the way I think, at least from my research, I've never seen it manifest this way before. Is nowadays you have people approaching these subjects, and it's not an overwhelming majority, thank God, but it's a very vocal community that approaches magic and these subjects from a point of, I want to say, postmodern reductionism and borderline atheistic materialism. And I'm not sure that we've seen spirituality, literally intercourse and dealings with spirits done in such a, well, never before in a postmodern context, because this is the postmodern age, right? It hasn't happened before. But you know, this, you've got like these primary ingredients like the Enlightenment and Cartesianism and nominalism, that and the educational institutions which have essentially installed all of us, without our knowing, with this perceptual software with which to look at the world without even realizing it, right? A computer program doesn't even realize it's a computer program. So it's just doing its job. And that's kind of the thing I see people. Yes, there's this vocal kind of, and I'll be frank, it's the grimoire and Solomonic communities online. And those communities will eventually just tear each other apart. They will eat each other alive. Because that is the Faustian consequence of making pacts with spirits. It never ends well. Falling only feels like flying. But the interesting thing is that they're approaching it through this extremely, I don't understand. Like, I talk a lot on this show, especially about how like cognitive dissonance doesn't have to persist if you're able to hold these two things in front of you and give them their own domains of authority. But I think that they need to be working in tandem with each other. And what I see going on there is that they're holding these two things as sort of mutually exclusive, but they're not working in a tandem. They're shutting one door to enter a room and turning their back on the reality of the other thing, and they're toggling. And I think that's a very unhealthy thing to do, because essentially it's just escapism. And it will create a bifurcation in the personality. If you're engaging magical faculties, that's why one of the first things you do when you get involved in an esoteric order is you take on a nomen mysticum or a magical motto, what have you. You know, it's a Latin, Greek, or Hebrew, typically, right? Scriptural, Western scriptural language. That's, that's your quote unquote name now in the order, but it's supposed to exemplify some sort of inspiration or aspiration of the candidate. And it's because you are undergoing, through some of these orders, and by the activation and application of your own magical faculties, you're undergoing a period of I would say, attenuated self-induced psychosis. And ultimately, the whole idea of alchemical initiation is that you're supposed to reintroduce all these, the salvia coagula. The coagula has to happen again under the auspices of spirit. And that's the saving grace. That's why you don't go over the edge. Many of us do. And I think that that's missing in that community. That they're dealing very unhealthily with this very like Western university system, left-brained, highly rational. And then on the other hand, they're talking about spirits and stuff like that. So that's what I see kind of different now, but same but different.
You kind of like what you kind of just clicked for me was kind of like, this new wave, not new wave, but it's like, okay, I read a book and I go to college and I heard that DMT is the way to meet the spirit, right? So it kind of goes into that, like, I don't really believe in God, but I love chemistry and I'm going to play, I'm going to play with this a little bit and see where I get. And it can leave, it's a, like you said, it's a very slippery slope. And I think we've seen a lot of people that can get, can kind of fall down it.
Yeah, I like to call it Rick and Morty metaphysics.
Yeah,
It's like, it's
yeah,
like,
and I mean all these things, like even we're talking about, there's so many new things. Even when you're watching YouTube, there might be an ad about, hey, take ketamine and let's, this is going to help you. This is going to do this and that. So we're completely eliminating this idea of true source, right? Your own ability to maybe create that healing. So there's a master to it, right? So how strong are you as an initiate if you still have the master? If that is maybe a substance, or I understand the ancient mystery schools from studying them. I mean, I understand the use of these narcotics and whatnot, but there's a certain way to do them where they never do them again. Does that
Right.
resonate with you? Where it's
Yes.
not like, hey, I use this every Friday because I want to go into deep samadhi.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Exactly.
know? You
I'm
train yourself
microdosing.
enough, you'll naturally go into it.
Exactly. That's what
You
you
know what I
should
mean?
be. That's what you should
What you
be.
should be doing.
Yeah. I
We're
mean,
we're we're on the we're gonna be the hey, you should be, yeah, it's neat because I have friends, and my friends are totally atheist, and they're still atheists, and they're still consuming, right? We're all consuming, whether it's from school, whether it's from TV, you're consuming. But there's no idea of consuming source in any of it. It's like, hey, this guy's got the answers, or this doctor's going to feed me, pump me full of testosterone so I can get big, instead of just like, hey, disciplined diet, all these things. So we've eliminated ritual and creating self-ritual. Whereas if we go into the routine of consumerism, right, there's always a need for this. I need coffee. I need coffee. I need coffee. So it's interesting, and I love tying it back into magic. It's cool. Yeah.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
kind of that what you're talking about, I kind of view that model of interpretation or handling of this style of approach, um, like this postmodern sort of thing. I wonder what you think, but it seems like some potentially like intermediary transitionary state. Like if you think of like society and its ebb and its flow, um, being that we've gone so far in this other direction, and now it seems as if the tide is sort of turning back in terms of spiritual knowledge, um, that that sort of interpretation and approach is kind of just the result of the societal momentum that we're currently finding ourselves in. That now that these things are kind of reemerging, it's the default programming that has been programmed into our culture, that's just how they are. That's just how people generally are are thinking about how to handle information, because we've I think it seems that we've been deprived of like spiritual holism in a sense for so long, that now that we have the freedom and the information all accessible, and things are just like flooding out, and everything you can possibly think of you can find online or in your social media or whatever it is, that it seems like I don't I don't know if it's going to be something that's sustainable by any means, but it seems like it makes sense that it is the way our society is approaching things. Does that resonate with you? Do you see what I'm saying there?
Yeah. Yeah. And I know Ike is gonna follow up with this. It's like this idea of building the temple is all exterior to everybody right now, right? Like I was saying, it's like we've gotten so far away from source. Of when I say source, it could be the Atma Linga, within yourself. So you've gotten to a point where society is painted a version that is happiness, which can be, you'll end up basically even more unhappy the more you are subscribing to some of these ideas, whether it's vastly altered your mind through different gurus or different things. It's like you have to be very careful when you're going on the journey, right? And I know Ike is a huge I don't even know, we both probably campaign, when people ask, it's like, hey, if you are studying, or you're on the, you're constantly talking about spirituality or different ideas, people are notice, they'll ask you questions, and you, as a, not saying you're a spirit guide, I think that's like a terrible term for anything. You have to be, you have to be very careful with people, because you'll notice, I know Ike does, and I know you, I'm sure Sky as well, like your friends or people that have been consuming a lot of this stuff. And I'm not saying it's all negative. I don't live like a monk, but I'm also, you have to be very delicate with how much you're consuming outside influence, because we see the result of influence, whether it is even with the orders, right? Ike, we can say this. There's some guys that are like, hey, I'm a Freemason. This is the end all be all. That's it. This is how I do things. It's like any Mason. It's like I say this to anybody, you know a Mason by how they treat a non-Mason. You know, if that was the real idea of what Masonry, the idea of, you know, hey, I follow this moral compass, I treat people with equality and all this, that means you treat all people with equality. So it's not just isolated to one group. There's no perfect institution, right? So that's why you study different things rather than just kind of following suit. And it can get, like we said, there's a lot of different rabbit holes you can go. But back to what you were saying, Sky, about, you know, how far are we going? It's like now we got the AI and the influence, and it's like I'm, you know, because I'm raising a child, you know, my son, we don't watch TV anymore. And when I do watch it, I remember why I don't watch it anymore. And that's at night. I'll get like my little like snippets of stuff, and I'm like, you notice how these things can change your entire outlook on life. You know, the music you're listening to, the movies you watch, all
And
these things.
even the rate of interruption, even if you are to watch something, you know, say you're watching a show on YouTube, or your kid's watching a show on YouTube, because, you know, that's happened to me a lot. And just the constant popping up of commercials, the interruption, the waiting for the ad, some ad coming on, you're skipping the ad, then back into the show. And then it's like this pattern that's
Well,
being entrained into the child of this constant interruption. Go ahead.
think about this too, which is really interesting. Now get real granular on that same vein, and think about when you're watching a television show or a movie and how many edits or cuts there are. You don't even, unless you're involved in the editing of film, you don't even fucking realize that the camera is changing angles every 7 seconds. Now, think about what that does, right? This is the first time in human history that we've ever been subject to that kind of jarring perceptive switch that has never, ever happened before. And when that's going on, your brain is in an alpha state. Your brain is in an alpha state. I mean, and then we're looking at anxiety, and we're looking at like ADHD, and we're looking at like autism. And I mean, and I'm not saying all these things have one cause, but I'm saying like it's the overarching. We have so many blind spots to this stuff. We just think it's normal, and it's not. Because we were born into a hellscape. And
Oh,
so
this is about to get really good.
like we're
Sorry.
literally
I'm like, okay. All
born
right.
into like
Shit's hit the fan.
a post-technological hellscape, and it's like, oh, it's just fucking normal that all this stuff is going on. But the essence of the question here is spirituality, because that's what you asked, Guy. To your point, that's the thing that is affecting us, because when you're born into these systems and you're born into these things that are constantly acting upon and training your consciousness, it just goes back to what I was saying before. It is installing or altering perceptual software. And so there is no going back from that. You can't.
Absolutely none.
You cannot go back from that. You can only find a new way, which unfortunately must involve uncovering all your blind spots so that you can at least have an idea of what it was like to be a human when humans could be human, and not influenced on a cognitive level to the degree that they have been by technology and the agendas that are inherent to that. Now, I mean, and you know, look at any industry. Who ends up at the top of the industry? Who ends up making all the money?
Is this a question for us?
Yeah.
You know, it's when you watch the industry, whether it is music, whether it is Hollywood, right? It's never the person you're seeing. It's the executives. It's a guy that's 90 years old that owns the studio owns a record label.
That's it. Technology.
Yeah, technology owns you. And it's in, you know, you just made me think of something, and this is about to get squirrely, but I'll let you keep.
Every single time there's been a technological revolution, the people who end up on top are in ownership of the technology. So when radio stations invented broadcasting, boom, they own the radio, regardless of whose music is being played. When they then went further and they developed recording equipment, they own the recording equipment. When it's, you know, the movie studios, we own the cameras, we own the film, we own it's the same thing with the technology we're seeing now. Major mega corporations, tech corporations like Google and things like that, pioneering this, Meta now with the virtual reality and different AI platforms. I mean, these people are going to these things, they've found a way to maintain the illusion that they're open source. But the issue here is that really we have been introduced. I want to maybe just pitch it to you real quick, Sky, like alchemically. You have something, right? You have a couple of different components, and essentially, like, we are adding something. We are adding something that is going to we're adding a third thing to our little alchemical mixture here. And so once those chemicals, at least on the level of just basic chemistry, once certain chemicals interact with one another, they change. It's like soap making, right? Like when I make soap, I use lye, I use oil, and I use distilled water. And the saponification process happens when those three things are introduced at a certain time and at a certain temperature. Once those three things have congealed, I cannot reduce them to lye, fat, and distilled water again. This is the essence of human cognition and the advent of this level of technology. So that is what has happened. And I think that ultimately, I'm not going to pretend I know why, but I think all things happen. There's some kind of telos for them that I am too small a cog and too large a machine to understand. I think we have to go through this, but that doesn't mean it's going to have a happy ending. We just have to go through it. And I think that there's another way that maybe nobody can see. Nobody will be able to see it for another 50 to 100 years. Like, oh, it had to work out that way.
Well, you said there were so many things that were running through my head. You're talking about how, the messaging, right? Or the celebrity becomes the spirit. We've seen that over the last several years. And then what has actually happened is the celebrity is no longer, and it's all politicians are now the spirit, the end all. It's like the behavior. Years ago, I used to joke around with my dad, talking about the fall of Rome. And you look at the archetype of what that looks like, and you see how things can go. And that's what history is. I always talk about history and how studying, or whatever you're into, whatever culture you come from, there is a story that is so familiar to the now, if that makes sense. No matter where you come from, whatever race, whatever, there's something there that relates to now. And I was, funny thing, you said something that clicked to me about The Sopranos. Anybody's watched seasons of The Sopranos, early ones of the 90s, you'll see them, like, and I'm not saying this, but I'm like, why are they talking about ADD so much in here? Why are they talking about Prozac? And then I was watching it and I started researching it, and I was like, I don't remember ADD when I was a kid. And it was first discovered in like the late 80s, but then the pharmaceutical companies got involved, and I'm like, oh, look at this messaging. And I remember the early 2000s, every kid has got ADHD, everybody's on ADD and Ritalin. I'm like, oh, it's right here in what you're consuming, you're watching it. So it's like you're the manifestation of the magic when you listen to it. When you listen to the sorcerer, the magician, right? That's why I know you study it, we all study it here. We're not, but you understand the idea. Everybody talks about black and white magic. There is a real difference there, a massive difference, because I believe, and you can chime in, but white magic is to the individual sense, I believe, where it's like to the being of creating your own connection with source through magic or through spirituality. I'll just use that term, rather than using magic to manipulate, which, if you understand the idea of manipulation and how magic is the art of manipulation, it's like, where's your balance? So I always tell people, I'm like, what you're influenced by, what you're listening to, all these things we're talking about are so important. And you watch your friends that are bought into some of these, whatever it is. And I myself, I was like, I take a lot of pleasure of being like, hey, I would never influence somebody with how they should believe. I think that's just like the lowest form of being, to me, and when I mean lowest form is like, people using these new wave terms of high vibration, low vibe, shit that's just like, hey, this is a fucking hashtag. Like, what is this shit?
Yeah.
So it's more so the manipulation of when you watch it from a alchemical standpoint, whether you want to tie in, um, the magic in it, you're just like, do you sit silent? And I feel like that is something that is part of it. It's like some people just aren't supposed to find the way in a weird sense. And you'll know
Yeah.
that in history. People call it NPC, right? That's like a term, everybody fucking throwing that around. I'm like, hey, it's like, are you going to let somebody know, or are you going to influence them? It's like they have to find their own way. So people that are listening, maybe you're having a problem with your family or shit or whatever it is, it's like, hey, they can go down the rabbit hole. Or do you have to curveball them maybe through the mistakes? I know, I made a ton of mistakes when I was younger. It's like if there was always somebody there to catch me, it's like sooner or later I'm going to find a bigger fucking cliff to jump off of. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you see a lot of that too, when people are trying to like quote unquote save their families. It's like, get fucking real. You just want to feel vindicated by a group of people who you felt doubted you your entire life. But most of the
Yeah.
because
It's ego.
well, yeah, it is, because
Yeah.
the thing is, like, people who really care about their families will not go about it that way. They will not go about beating somebody over the head. It's like, you beat me over the head for fucking 10 years. Now let me do it for a little while. That kind of reciprocity has no space. But the thing is, to your point, Drew, absolutely. And I think that's the key that's missing. White magic, theurgic magic, the magic of spiritual evolution is right, and an interior process that has exterior manifestations. And you start out with either good intentions or bad intentions. And then the eventuality, if you stay on that road long enough, is to know that you should not have any intentions, because it's really true. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I know plenty of people that are invested in goetic magic for the well-being of other people. It's like, first of all, that's not your fucking karma. It's like you're playing the savior. You're loading things onto your fucking ego. You're gonna pay for it. You make this poor person who agreed in ignorance to buy your fucking talisman. Yeah, okay, he made a lot of money. What do you think's gonna happen? He didn't know how to use the fucking money. If he knew how to make money, he wouldn't be in this conundrum. It's like when people get a winning lottery ticket, in like 6 years they're bankrupt and divorced. It's like
Fucking mess.
because what people are doing is like, you're trying to clean up a workstation with filthy hands. So the theurgy is going and washing your hands first. Go and get yourself right. And people think they'll read a book or two, or they'll take a few college courses. This is a lifetime's endeavor. Theurgy. It's not a one time. It's not
I
something
like
you
that. I like
accomplish.
that reincarnation plug there.
Yeah, the Greeks
Yeah,
had it too. They called it metempsychosis. It was
that's
they
right.
believed in there's reincarnation in the
That's
Bible.
Hades. That's Hades. That's Hades. That's samsara, right? So, and that's been so, it's like I said, even having these conversations is like people listen and they're like, okay, well, it's like, no, you have to dig deep into what it is. Like you yourself, you have your background. I know you're Greek. So it's like, hey, I'm Scottish. So that was a no brainer for me to dive right into the Knights Templar history and all this stuff. And it's kind of, whether it was Freemasonry, looking into that, and architecture, all these things. And then eventually you'll kind of find the things that you're most gel with, or you're like, hey, I like this. And then by doing so much research in different things, you'll have such an appreciation for all culture. And I think that's like going back to the beginning of the conversation with all these um, people we're mentioning from the 19th century. These are all well-traveled people, but you don't have to be well-traveled. You can pick up a book from a different writer, whether it's a yogi or it's Plato. You can get this experience through, the study of these different subject matters. And that is so important.
Well, for people who aren't necessarily familiar with your work, Drew, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do? Because you are a pretty well-traveled guy, and I mean what you do in terms of like, what are you into? We know you, right?
Oh,
You're a Freemason. You study Egyptology. You travel to these places. So tell us about. I think that would be interesting for people who listen to the pod.
That's because I love doing, always since I was a kid, love doing research, obviously traveling to different sites. What I'm really into is spirituality and that whole journey, but not in like a, hey, I want to get a group together and let's sit and I want to sell you on a subscription. I think that's the exact opposite of spirituality and wealth, or all these ideas. It's, the idea of when these yogis, and I've been in India, and I love some of the old writings of yogis that have good commentaries and stuff, good food for thought. But at the end of the day, it's a commentary to the person, right? So you could just listen to commentaries your whole life, whether it's somebody doing a commentary on the Bible, but until you pick it up and read it yourself, it doesn't really, you're not really getting the source of the energy of the initial writing, right? And I know you're right there with me as far as studying. You're like, okay, I like Plato's work. I like all these guys. So for me, younger, started studying all these different subjects, started traveling very young, a family in the UK, first generation American. So I was saying this the other night, it's like growing up British in America in a sense. It's like I didn't play American sports. We had football, like kicking a soccer ball about. So going over to UK, and then I had realized that my grandfather was in India in World War II with the British Navy. And then I just started to have a fascination with India really young. And then through my travels, I just started to explore temples because I grew up in California. The closest thing we have to a temple are the missions here, which are also temples, and they're built on the principles of real temple building. So these are beautiful things that anybody in California, whether in Los Angeles, San Diego, you can visit all these sites. But that is my main thing, is to go and study these temples and really get a sense of, number one, why they were built, the idea behind it, without this idea of there being an alien responsible for it. I think that completely cuts you off from the journey of the discovery of why these were built. Because I know, like, you've been in Greece. When I went there, you go to the Pantheon, Acropolis, and you're seeing these sites, and there's a purpose to them that people are not understanding, rather than just a photo shoot. So I got the temple bug. I started traveling Southeast Asia, travel all over Europe, into India, Middle East, Turkey, Egypt. So, and just being able to share those kind of ideas, and then writing about them, doing little articles. Also really into just writing in general. Got published for poetry work, and I kind of make it a little bit esoteric in a way where it's fun for the reader. And I do it in a sense where it's very important for me not to have some sort of stronghold or gatekeeping on any subject matter. I like to leave it open to commentary. So if you can present something to someone where it allows them to have an opinion of it, I think that's a beautiful way to create dialogue. And just to wrap it up, my biggest thing I'm into creating now is this idea of presence and staying present. And that was the one thing that all the temples, when I sat back and I thought about all the temples I've been to, I was like, what does it feel like? Or what is the main takeaway? Is the teaching of the hero's journey is really just you versus yourself, is really what kind of started to resonate with me. And through my research and going to these places, and it's like I see the same story repeating, and it really is that you against you, and creating harmony. And why is a temple built? And discovering these ancient manuscripts on the Dharma temples of India, and that just blew that like changed my life when I saw that. And studying that was pretty in itself. When you do the studying, you'll have those awakenings, or whatever you want to call them, right? You'll have those epiphanies, or it will lead you back to the source of whatever that is really truly within yourself, and being honest. And that was pretty much the defining moment, was when I went to the temple, and I was like, in this temple before, and it was thousands of miles away from this one. And I was like, what is this all to teach us? Is human beings, and what my commentary was on it was really the discovery is to create a temple within yourself, which is not just like, hey, you look like this, it's that. It's like, no. All bullshit aside, it's create harmony with the people around you. And that's pretty much been my journey. And that's really what I'm about. And where that journey takes me is, as long as I'm in the present state, that's pretty much where I'm at. I mean, is mine, as weird as that may sound, but it's an ongoing process, and it's a lot of different directions to meet a lot of interesting people like yourselves. So yeah, I know that was a long-winded. Yeah,
I'm gonna
No,
throw
good.
out some
you want to
some things and then ask you a question. So if I think about a lot of these ancient structures and ancient temples, things that come to my mind might be things like acoustics, sound, brainwave states. They could be symbolic representations of principles. They could be energetic points. It could be having associations with sacred springs, potentially astronomically aligned landmarks. You had mentioned the experience that you had kind of arrived at, that sense of wanting to create this inner temple, something along those lines. I wonder, what do you feel like after visiting a lot of these temples? What was it what were some of the indications for you that allowed you to arrive at that conclusion?
Well, I'll simplify this to a temple that everybody in the world knows, Great Pyramid of Giza. The way that it is designed, when you go in it, it has 3 chambers. You have the rough chamber at the bottom, which is subterranean. It's all full of rubble. And then it starts to get a little bit polished up at the top when you visit it. You go in the middle chamber, that's called the Queen's Chamber. That's a little bit finer. And then there's the King's Chamber at the top. That's the one that has the granite sarcophagus in the center of it. And when you enter the pyramid itself, obviously, when you study Egypt, it will take you in a million different directions. And I've been to Egypt twice, and it just leaves you with more questions. But when you walk in these structures, they all are built on the principles of awakening. Rather, it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter what you believe, you're going to have a feeling when you're in these spaces. They're aligned with certain planets that have certain energies, whether you believe it or not. Okay, I could put anybody in the pyramid and they're going to have some sort of feeling. You go in it, when you go into the King's Chamber, it's a small hole. You got to basically, I'm tall, so it's like you're basically kind of crawling into the room. It's like the act of crawling is the act of submitting your ego, in a sense, right? So then you're awakened into the room, but there's a box there. You can possibly get into the box and do sound healing there, and you will feel an energy that is nothing short of physical magic, is, I guess, the term. It's you'll have this sense that exists, like, not just in your mind, but your body. You'll feel a different way. And the pyramid, when you're walking up the Grand Gallery, it's at so many different angles. It's always attacking your senses. So you're being taught to recognize your senses all throughout life. That's what I take it as, right? So to be aware of your senses and to be aware of the senses being tied to your emotional state, maintaining that balance of your emotions is really the purpose of these temples, I believe. That's my commentary, but each temple I've been in, and the ones that are on the same alignments as some of these temples, whether, like you said, Sky, being close to water, all temples are close to water. They all have to do with, you have water, you have air. When you're going in the Great Pyramid, all the shafts, when you're in it, it sounds like it's breathing. I remember telling my wife, I was like, this temple is breathing. This is a living thing. In that moment, I immediately knew. I was like, this is like ancient stonemasons or whoever built it with the intent to, it's that they say it's an energy source. Like, everybody talks about it being an energy source, and they're like, oh, for power, and they want to power fucking light bulbs. I'm like, no, it's to power yourself. It's to teach you to power your own ability to create source, which is through your emotions, through being present, all these kind of things all tied into it. And when you research all the material that has been left by the Egyptians, whether it was the Greeks, that basically what these sites, and they figured out the one thing that I love to talk about. The Greeks were such beautiful poet, and they were so poetic in the allegories of the spirituality of ancient Egypt. Whereas if they went into the temple and they were basically writing what they were describing, how they felt, if you look at it, right? Because none of the temples in Egypt ever had fucking bodies in them. Bodies of these pharaohs are buried on the backside of the Valley of the Kings. So even the Valley of the Kings, these tombs, these are initiation places for deep spiritual practices, like a resurrection ceremony. I mean, you go into Egypt, the story of Horus, Set, and Isis. It's a story of resurrection. It's kind of been convoluted in this idea. It's like, oh, this is just, this is their burial ritual. I'm like, no, this is living resurrection. Living resurrection is the transmutation of material to ritual, in my mind, right? So you'll see that in all of these different temples. You can go into a Dharma temple in India, and same idea, resurrection. The resurrection of what? Is removing yourself from the material and turning it into ritual, in a sense. The ritual being present, just being alive and enjoying what you have in front of you and balancing your emotions to navigate whatever fucking comes your way, good, bad.
Yeah, I think that's there's a couple of really good points there going back. I mean, having been to, a lot of temples, particularly in that whole ancient Mediterranean area, inclusive of Egypt and North Africa, but just the broader Mediterranean, you do get certain feelings. I will say that I've never felt anything in my life like when I was in Dendara, the Dendara temple. I mean, I felt this kind of like thing my whole life that I couldn't put my finger on, that I guess I would call it the religious impulse. And it's very, very much a feeling. And it's a feeling that I have a very difficult time describing. And it doesn't have to do with any hope of immortality or any hope of it's post hope. It's more like when you really want to, the Greeks would have called it eros, when you really like, if you haven't seen your wife or your significant other for a really long time, and it's just that longing, that sense of like not having a sense of home because this person isn't here. And it's that to probably like, several orders of magnitude. And I've just felt that my whole life. And that's just an analogy that I'm using to describe it. I can't even really put it into words. But when I stepped into Dendara and I was in there for about 4 or 5 minutes, I realized like this entire place, it was like walking into that feeling. It was if that feeling became a physical building and I walked into it, and the walls were dripping with it. It was unbelievable how transported I was into that specific feeling again. And and that's interesting because it's technically, it's Middle Kingdom Egypt. It's later, it's Hellenistic Egypt. I mean, there would have been, Hellenistic priests in there, but that was a powerful experience.
Yeah, Dendara is so ornate and so beautiful. And when you study the symbolism, another thing, it's like, let's just bypass all the symbolism. That doesn't mean anything. It's just an alien dropped that fucking thing here. You know what I mean? So it's like,
that's more of exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You're talking about how like people think that like they were trying to power light bulbs, which is hilarious. It's like,
I'd love to explain that symbol. I mean, I love that symbol. Yeah, the Dendara light bulb, for anybody that doesn't obviously seen on Ancient Aliens, where they're talking about it being it's a lotus bowl, for God's sakes. And when you look at that's a trigger for me. you know, as somebody that it's like, why are we discrediting an entire culture of people like they mean nothing? It's like there's still people that study ancient Egyptian magic in Egypt, you know. So the Dendera light bulb where it shows a guy and it looks like it's a landing, you know, there's wires. I'm like, this is a lotus bulb. The lotus represents resurrection. It's rebirth. It's from mud. It grows in mud, and it grows in this beautiful thing. You're looking at the Jed, and that is the one that looks like that's the one that's shaped like looks like an electric. Everybody's like, this is an electronic. This is a fucking telephone pole, right? The Jed pillar. The
Yeah, you have
Jed
like a little hat
pillar.
on top.
Yeah, it looks like a little hat. The Jed pillar is sitting underneath the lotus bowl. Pardon me. The Jed pillar representative of Osiris's backbone. And when you're Osiris's backbone basically is about the raising of Osiris from resurrection. So this is about spiritual enlightenment. It's not about, hey, yo, we had some light here, we had this. I love the idea of imagining how they did it. It's like, I don't really care. I'm like, yeah, this is very sophisticated. I understand that. You know, anybody that's been in the trades fucking can look at that and be like, yo, that's a lot of fucking work. You know, so
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not, yeah, I'm not, yeah.
The organization of manpower is the real miracle.
Harmony, bro.
Because if you have like an architect who like really just had all these great ideas, I know exactly how it's going to work, he ain't going to do it. You need a workforce that is
the beautiful story. That is the beautiful story that has not been told, right? Is about the stonemasons. And I'm not attributing this to Freemasonry alone or anything else, right? I'm saying crafts, ancient people's ability to overcome has been completely perverted by this idea of that intervention. Human beings have existed X amount of years. Why are we discrediting this entire timeline of history, development, and abilities? We're talking about how advanced we are. I'm like, spiritually, the world used to run off ritual and harmony. That's why these temples were developed. They're developed to create harmony. Everything is built on the outside of the temple and goes out this way. You know, it's when you read Vastu Shastras, I mean, I sound like I fucking talk about the shit all the time, but it's Vastu Shastras in the Vedic texts. They're in the Rig Veda. It specifically talks about temple design and about how every square has a spirit connected to it, a planetary design, and an emotion that is going to get out of you in the temple. So, segue to anybody interested. Yes, ancient Egypt, wonderful, but the problem is they didn't leave behind that information. So that's why it's more speculative with, you know, whether it was, you know, laser cut technology or this, that, and that. That's why there's a battleground there. But if we look at my boys in India, in ancient India, it's like there is a manuscript on temple design. So you take that same temple design that is here in the Vedic text, and you can take that same text and see that same temple somewhere else in the world. So that's a little hidden guide for people in a sense. You look at the new temple that was built in New Jersey, right? There's a huge one in New Jersey that was built, Hindu temple. And they're like, we don't know how they did, you know, I'm like, you have people that have been handing down the material for thousands of years. So it still exists. It's just, you have to give a shit to look at it.
Yeah. And I mean, craftsmen have to, the average person has no idea what it means to be a master craftsman. The average person can hardly tie their fucking shoes, to be honest with you. I mean, that's not the pejorative. It's just,
of course,
it's just the truth, where it's like, until, like, kind of like what you were saying, until you have the experience, till you have the gnosis of the experience, you have no idea. You have a handful of theories, but you have no idea what it actually entails. And that's the discouraging thing for me, is that an abundance of like overeducation in this country and in the West in general, and the coming full circle back to what we're talking about, the installation of perceptual software has, and I like to say this, especially in front of all my very well-educated friends, like there are like several generations of people that have learned themselves stupid. because the issue is we have this widespread perception that ancient cultures were primitive. Look at how perfect that work is. There's no way. So now we're the arbiter. We're the locus of what is true and what is possible, rather than expanding our minds and enlarging our, our modes of thinking to embrace, like, yeah, okay, maybe we don't know how they did it, but it's not impossible for somebody to achieve that level of perfection. We don't work with our hands regularly as people anymore. Most people had to have a garden. It had to have livestock. I mean, we don't have to do that anymore. So it's like you don't know really how capable you can be in terms of, what the Greeks would call techne, a technical skill craft. Zosimus would call it kairokmeta, things made by hand. And so that you see this. That's why people, that at least that's the clearest line I can see of how we have basic assumptions through which we filter all observation and all succeeding information. So we're constantly making these judgments based on a priori perspective, meaning I'm not going to put any extra thought or experimentation into it. I'm just going to say that it didn't happen because it can't. And that's what an a priori assumption is. And so in a lot of ways, it's like, yeah, we're being taught to think that, like, it's not possible for people at that early of a date to build this stuff. So then what's the alternative? Well, something helped them, or, they had some aliens did it and things like that. But the main problem that we're going to have with that, aside from all this intellectual speculation, boils down to the spiritual problem. Because we are increasingly, the more intellectual we become and the more reliant on technology we become, the less able we are to actually really, truly understand, deeply, really understand the nature of spirituality until right around the time of the Enlightenment, which was, kind of like you were pointing out, a very holistic, especially at that early time. It's spirituality. It was like everything's spiritual. You can't put spirituality in a box. You can't have a spirituality blog. Like the sun dying and being reborn every day is a spiritual fact. And so, we've chosen to go the route of, bifurcating and like Sky said, I think the word he used is, like, we've kind of abandoned a holistic point of view in favor of a very, very technical one, a mentally technical viewpoint. And that's made us spiritually illiterate we're not able to detect the presence of spiritual assumptions. So we're like, okay, yeah, we don't know what spirituality means. It's a bunch of ooga booga woo woo bullshit. So yeah, why did they build it? They're trying to make light bulbs. Well, who built it? The aliens. And then it's like, you listen to that, you're like, that is fucking absurd. Everything that's coming out of your mouth is fucking garbage.
I love that we're talking about spirituality. We're like so aggressive about it. Like, what the fuck?
You got to be, man. You got to be, right?
You have to be. You have to be.
With the money lenders.
No, because it's like, if you're not authentic to yourself, then who the fuck are you being? You know what I mean? So it's like, I'm sitting here, you guys ask me what I'm about. I'm like, I'm about self-discovery and discovering what this is all about, right? It's like, I'm not believing the status quo anymore. There's things I love. Here's a little weird idea, and I don't know if anybody's come out with this theory about where did these people go? The spaceship came and got them, whatever. Check this out. If you believe in reincarnation, what if these generations just didn't come back after they died? Boom. Maybe they're fucking not in Samsara or Hades anymore. Maybe that generation of people created the perfect temple, dun, 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 and then guess what? They don't come back. So they meet, in Dharma, and I'm not calling it Hinduism, because Hinduism is encompassing, it is the entire continent of India. That includes religions to the culture of India. So I'm kind of just isolating Dharma and the will of Dharma. But the idea that, you know, the moksha from samsara, the liberation. What if these people just found so much spirituality that, you know, that generation just did not reintegrate into samsara in a weird ass. I know it's totally fucking weird, but it's also like I like thinking about things in a way where it's not like, you know what, the spaceship fucking went here. Yo, is a spaceship just a distraction to keep us all dumb? Like I don't know anymore. You know?
These things are ways to keep us mired in materiality.
I
I
love alien shit.
I
Yo,
need a
I'm the
material
first
answer.
huge alien fanboy, but it's like, dude, people are talking about, you know, oh, Avatar is such a cool story. It's such a beautiful thing. I'm like, a ripped off story out of the Vedas, bro. Come on, man. Damn, dude, it's crazy. Like,
Well,
what
I
are we
mean,
doing?
there's only a handful of stories you can tell anyway. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
you're
mean,
just like, okay, where are we going? Where are we going now? Take something out of, we're gonna take a story out of the Bible and kind of just mess it around and do this, that, or you know. So, like you said, with this repetition that we're continually creating, where it's just like, what is going on? Yeah,
yeah. I
this
mean,
is
you know, the thing is for me, when I was in my 20s, I was very, you know, I went through a period in young life where I was very aggressive and kind of, you know, the typical young man bullshit, trying to find out what you're all about and what being a man is all about, and you know what your hormones are doing. You know, I feel like this is less and less the case in serious public dialogue, but I feel like, you know, women got a pass for hormonal stuff for a really long time, and we never talk about it with men because our hormonal cycle is 24 hours. So it's literally every day we're on a cycle, you know. So it seems nor it goes kind of at that point when it's not this long arch, it just seems like, oh, this is just the way you are. And to, you know,
just normal, right? Yeah.
and it is, but you got to also understand, you know, there's a hormonal component to that. But you know, aside from figuring all that stuff out, I got really into Eastern spirituality as a palliative to get out of that, and it made me very, very zen. But then the eventuality for that were two things: nihilism and self deification. I deified myself instead of humbling myself, and I called it, you know, like, well, I'm just very relaxed. I'm peaceful now, thank God. You know, I was a raging alcoholic lunatic, and now I have my peace. But I don't think that I don't think that that's the spiritual end. That may be a means, but what we're doing is we're making the means the end now. And I truly believe, because you see it in all serious scripture, whether that's official or unofficial. In times of spiritual crisis, there are certain people who need to be warriors. So aggression has its place. But the whole thing is, the key is that, you know, in the Golden Dawn we have the you know, it's in Freemasonry as well, but specifically in the Golden Dawn, when we take the sign of Osiris, the left hand is always over the right, because when you're in the Kabbalistic model, you know, of the Kabbalistic tree of life superimposed on your body, the left side is actually the side of mercy, and the right side is the side of severity. And so when we cross, you know, the traditional image is what? The crook and the scourge, right? I am the shepherd and I am also the warrior. But it's ultimately the left. It's mercy that has to unleash severity. It's always up to mercy to open that gate to severity, which is a way of saying, like, everything has its place. And I think one of the best examples of that for occultists is the Kabbalistic tree of life, because Gebura is severity, and nothing on the upright tree is averse. Nothing on the upright tree is averse.
It's interesting when you're describing the left side and the weaker side of man, right? It's the left side. That's, you look at all the statues in ancient Egypt and a lot of several other places, right? They understood that. They understood the divine balance. Well, you know, people are talking about, oh, balance, divine balance of what? It's like, what is the feminine? Where does that come into play? Is that the subduing of your ego, perhaps? Is that why the statue is moving on the left when it takes off? It's like to act in humility and act in that what is like you were saying, Ike, about you have to create, there has to be, you're creating that idea of the higher source rather than, hey, I'm the man, bro. I'm this life coach, homie. I got you. Like, I've nothing to worry about, doggy. You know, the new age way. I don't know, dude. I'm from California, man. So we
Nothing to worry
fucking just
about,
let it
doggy.
rip.
New age.
What's up, doggy? I got you, dude. Yo, man, I'm the one. But it's like having that humility and what it creates around you. I say this to anybody. It doesn't matter what you believe in or anything. Start to work on that. And right, your ego, because ego, you'll get a little bit off. You're like, oh, this person's get a little bit more light where I want to get light. You know, it's, you know, that taken off. What else, pardon me, is a sign of the feminine source is service, right? In a lot of ways, is giving service, giving back. It's like, I wrote something the other day and I was playing around with it. It's like, hey, you can either be a doormat or a doorway, you know. It's like, yeah, that's creating service, you know, but you're also not the guy, you're not the fucking door being like, I'm a gatekeeper. It's like, no, you got to let people in. You have to have that ebb and flow, and you're going to do these things. And I think it was you sharing about your 20s. I mean, fuck, man, I was a bouncer in my 20s. My face when I gotta say that, I was a fucking bouncer in my 20s at bars. So it's like, hey, through fear and learning how fear is such a powerful tool. And I tell that to anybody. I'm like, fear experience is, that is such a beautiful thing to really start to analyze yourself. And a guru, a priest, and this, that, they might give you an example of what their commentary on it. You have to create your own commentary. So for me, it's like, hey, I don't want to be around fucking nonsensical bullshit. I don't want to be around violence. I don't want to be around drugs. And that's just from my own personal viewpoint, right? Because you know, that feeling that it makes you feel. It's like that I'm on edge all the time, or I'm around fear, you know, like being in a bar. Am I going to get fucking hit with a chair or a pool cue, you know, or stabbed? Yeah. So it's, you know, people need to look at spirituality in a more so, they don't need to look at anything. I take that back. It's a good, for me anyway, it's like the examination of self and responsibility for your own journey, in a sense, with a higher humility and for why you're on the journey. Where is that coming from? Why? It's not like you just one day woke up and be like, you know what, I want to start thinking about these things deeper. It's like, where does it come from? Where does the feeling of that come from if it's not coming from something else? You know, it's interesting. I love the atheism talks now too, because I have friends that we're similar age. Like everybody was like, yo, dog. When I was a kid, everybody's like, yo, dog, God ain't real. You know what I mean? So it's like, you know, it's just funny. It's like, for me, it's like, I like to simplify things because that's just, it's funny. And I hope people can find their own little pathways, because that's the worst thing as practitioners. And you see things and you worked on yourself, right? It's like, hey, you start to see the math of your own errors. You start to read math without numbers in yourself, and the history of your own routine and the things that you're doing all these reps of, right? It's like, when I get drunk, I fall down the stairs and I roll my fucking ankle or whatever it is. You keep doing that. There's a math to that, in a sense, where it's like, that's your own history. So the examination of your own history can give you a lot of development. You're like, oh, you know, when I cut that out, you know what? I'm not as unhappy anymore. So just, there's ways to do it, you know? So it's fun to share with you guys though. It's obviously men talking about spirituality is super rare unless they're fucking selling it.
Yeah.
Just saying.
We're trying to get laid.
Yeah. Hey, yeah, it's like, hey, I got some DMT and a fucking tree over here. You want to come hang out? It's like,
that's the thing. I've always found that kind of like spirituality as palliative, you know, that hyper commoditized. Like, first of all, I want to point this out, you know, like all major spiritual teachers, the Buddha is no exception. None of them had any chill. Okay, that is the defining characteristic of somebody who leaves friends, family, their possessions, their identity, and goes into the fucking woods, you know, to like find them.
You have to.
You have no chill if that's if that's what you're endeavoring. So that's like, but I found like being in like the yoga circles and stuff like that in Long Island, in the early 2000s and stuff, because a lot of that stuff came out in New York City and obviously on the West Coast too. But those were like San Francisco and like New York were the two places where I started to see it really bleed out late 90s, early 2000s, before it was just it because it exploded, right? I mean, it's like almost exclusively, like yoga pants are like the only thing that like a lot of people I know wear
That
anymore.
is like a rite of passage around here. This is
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
So it's like you need to go to vinyasa, otherwise I don't, I can't talk to you. You have to have attended like 4 or 5.
I feel
But I
yeah.
just noticed that like there was this really, really disingenuous subculture that like pretended to be very calm. And it was all about kind of this credit, this like this like like spiritual peace clout. And then
Oh,
obviously these guys were just taking advantage of women who needed healing. And you know what? And it's not even just guys, because I saw older women, you
oh
know,
yeah.
and older men
Yeah.
attempting to take advantage of young men who needed healing,
Oh, yeah, when you're talking about yoga, it just brings me back to the main teachings of yoga all have to do with the mind, nothing to do with the body. So it's like if it's only for exterior, I was like, there is no liberation to be found in it other than just, hey, I want to look good, I want some abs, and I want my butt to look nice in these yoga pants. And hey, if that's like the purpose, I know plenty of people that do yoga and wouldn't know where India was on a map, and that's totally cool. It's like, dude, I get it. So but obviously looking the way I do and being, as gone down that rabbit hole as much as I've kind of lived there now, I guess. Fuck. It's interesting because it's been a blessing where I live. That's obviously very popular. So it's nice if I can if I can help somebody with some sort of like I was saying, it's like, how much do you want to influence anybody? I don't want to fucking influence. I just want to be just positivity, spirit of my, right? You're just like, hey, what can I do? What kind of harmony can you create around you? But yeah, the yoga scene got totally fucked up. Totally fucked up. And they also
Cool.
have God, what else? But even in India, it's been good.
Yeah.
That's not isolating here. I mean, there's tons that are sitting. When I watch a good, and this is I'm gonna say this to anybody. I'm gonna stand on the. When I watch somebody giving any sort of speech from above somebody that's no than seeing if you're in Rome and you're seeing the priest statue down on you or whatever it is, right? For me anyway, I'm like, hey, I get it, but it's like, where's the connection to source for the individual? It's like, is it a blockade or is this honest? It's hard. So being aware, doing your own research and figuring out what works best for you in those teachings, whatever it may be, right? Because there's beautiful, I wasn't raised Christian, but there's beautiful things in all, I believe there's beautiful things in all religions.
Mhm.
But it's like you have to steady him. You can't just say that. There might be like, I don't really fuck with Aleister Crowley. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a perfect example of somebody that corrupted so much things that had so much the initial purpose, like we discussed earlier with these some of these teachings and stuff, how they get corrupted where men are taken in women or vice versa, whatever. So, that's the black magic. That's the black magic. It's like corrupting. Once you end the power of relation and then using it to corrupt, it's like I think we could all three of us speak on that of how it's so easy to see, you know. Yeah.
I think if you boil it down, it comes down to, and this is why there's so much training in esoteric orders, or there should be anyway. In preliminary training consists of morality, the same way it did in the Platonic school, right? Starts out with physical temperance and stuff like that, and then the next one is ethikos, ethics. And then after that is politicos, the civic duty that you now have, being an upright, ethical person. I mean, this is part of the Neoplatonic Academy, so this goes way, 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 way back. And so now, when you go into something like Freemasonry, which I think everybody should have to go through in order to like get into other esoteric orders, because there is co-masonry for women. I think that that's something that should be just my personal opinion. It should be prerequisite to joining something like the Golden Dawn, because we're not going to teach you that stuff because hopefully you already have your ducks in a row. But that's not always the case. So morality is that, because what happens is, if and when power does come, the only thing separating black and white is you. And if you can't trust yourself, you're going to be manipulative, because I think the best way that I could play the best way that I could make a distinction between black and white magic is selfishness versus selflessness. And lots of people, right? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. I don't have any specific intentions. I try not to have. Sometimes they pop up, right? But that's just part of the spiritual journey, is like, okay, you got to notice when you're passing something off to just another ego, and then kind of nip that in the bud. But one of the things that the Western mystery traditions, a la Neoplatonism, theurgy, and particularly as manifested in the Golden Dawn system, is to be led. Therefore, you don't have any intentions. You're just following. You're putting one foot in front of the other based on, in the Golden Dawn system, we would call it, you have been raised and united with your higher divine genius. And that term genius comes specifically out of Thomas Taylor's translation of the Neoplatonic material. He didn't want to translate daimon as demon, so he translated it as genius. And so we get that straight out of the Neoplatonic material, and it's essentially the linking of the lower persona to the transcendent aspect of our spiritual ontological chain, which can act as a mediator between us and the ineffable deity. And then you are to be led based on the promptings of that aspect of yourself. And the interesting thing is that it doesn't usually, the way your life turns out and the things that you do and the ways that you are encouraged, the endeavors that you are encouraged to sort of pursue, they don't necessarily appear to be even remotely similar to what we might consider in the modern day as spiritual, a lot of the time. And that's not just my own experiences. Other Golden Dawn adepti that I do, not many of them, but that I do speak with, who have attained way more of a connection to that than I have. And yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, you have all these ideas that you're going to be some sort of spiritual magician priest, and it's basically, it'll tell you like what job to take, and it's like, I didn't
Yeah.
want to do this, like, why do I have
Yeah.
to do this? But you just do it,
There's so many things that are available to people that are interested in, whether even with just tarot, right? I just went to your presentation on tarot, and things like that, just like little small steps, and see where these things, and the things that we're drawn to as human beings individually. It's all part of your art. The kind of music you listen to, oh, I like this, I like that. What kind of paintings you like? I like this, I like that. I like to write. How do you like to write? Things are all part of our art as individuals. And you'll find the group if you want to partake in it. These different societies, there's plenty of access now, whereas if back in the day there was little to no. So when you meet, I know I speak on this as well, is like when you meet older guys from some of these orders, they don't talk about it unless you're from the order. It's so old school, and there's such a revere. You can learn so much. It's still so much of that legacy, like we were talking about the yogis, whether it's sages or mystics, guys that were teaching. There's so many different levels to everything, rather than it just being evil. It's like, when you look at it as a whole, it's like everybody's kind of chasing spirituality here, outside of the black magic realm of what we're talking about. Instead of it being the Illuminati's, this, that. I'm like, there's plenty of people that have come out of orders and different societies have done some incredible things, whether it was innovations in medicine, innovations in just standards of living, rights for people, fighting, educating themselves for human rights, the names we talked about earlier, from Blavatsky's, these people that were fighting for women's rights. So it's like all this illusion that it is evil is like, yo, I'm totally, everybody, that magic in any sort of form can be used. It doesn't matter where it's from. There's people that are magicians, I'm sure. You know, when you're watching the person on you, if it doesn't sound authentic or it seems on too much script, it usually is, you know. It's like, yeah.
You know what's really funny? I'll kind of like talk every once in a while about, like, you know, the Black Lodges and things like that. I mean, Martina de Pasquale even spoke. He educated his you know, Elu Cohen during his lifetime on, like, how do we know who the Black Rosicrucians are? You know, like they're, you know, and I'll talk about this in Modern Orders. I'll kind of, and people be like, oh my God, are you kidding me? The conspiracy theorists, get out of here now with it. And I'm like, listen, you and I are standing here on a Saturday in robes and funny hats, meeting clandestinely for the purposes of accomplishing ritual. Now, how crazy would it be for people who did the same thing, but just had different intentions? How wild is that to possibly imagine? Because the whole thing is that, like, most people don't think that any of this should exist, period. Yet here I am. You know, here we are. So now, how much of a stretch is it to understand that, like, no, there are people who are using this specifically for dark purposes, which is just the accumulation of wealth, power, and you know, the manifestation of a particular vision, their particular vision of what paradise is. Ours is eating it.
I love what you just said there, the manifestation. Yeah. It's like they're of the emotion they're trying to get out of this subject. Yeah. For what purpose? It's like not everything's so complicated as everybody, you know, we get so distracted by the idea that everything's so complicated. It's like, hey, well, what about like going back to the ancient builders, going back to all these things? It's like, hey, if you discipline yourself in anything, you're going to get better at it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just having that integrity to just be a little bit more disciplined, be a little bit more patient. Simple things that we're all taught, the etymology of words. Words have power, words have meaning. I love you, I hate you. All these things are so, they convey such an essence to themselves, you know, and it's been kind of lost. So yeah, it's an interesting.
I've got a couple questions. I want to ask one that's just kind of more of a speculative, fun question, and then I want to ask another one to get both your takes on. But sorry if I cut you off or anything. Feel free to say whatever you're gonna say.
No, you're good.
Okay, cool. I'm curious, just out of curiosity, to hear your guys' thoughts on the Ark of the Covenant, and if you think that it was a real thing. If so, what was it? What was it really for? Like functionality. Do you know, along with the biblical thing, is that like coherent in your vision or your view? Or yeah, I don't know. I'm just curious, like what you think about that. I know that there are people that have said things along the lines of the Ark of the Covenant being something like a, you know, powered storage device, that it was stored in the pyramids, things like this. There's the tablets that held the commandments, things along these lines. So I'm just curious what you guys think about that. I'll ask you first, Drew.
That's a really fun one. I think the more you study different things, you kind of can come back to that. I would say it's the most popular idea. You know, the most familiar of so many different. You know, I could say the Ark of the Covenant is the Atma Linga, right? It's like the journey, the Atma Linga, and I associate it with liberation. I don't associate it with the physical.
What's the Akalinga?
The Atma Linga is like this, like soul of Shiva, right? So the soul of Shiva is the liberation. The liberation from what? The liberation from the distraction. If that makes obviously I talk in a, you know, I'm kind of just getting in the zone, but I'm saying I was like the Ark to me, and when I, you know, this discovery, it's a distraction from, it's like I always look at it as like of a spiritual thing, a physical thing. And I look at it like, oh, it was held in this place, it was held here. And it's like, oh, why was it held in this? Like when I was describing the pyramid, it's like, why was it held there? Oh, is that because this is an enlightenment thing? Or the idea of, is the ark just another name for a way of attaining liberation? Liberation meaning a oneness with source is what I alluded to. That's what I just, in my own take, I love history. I love the story, obviously, with the Knights Templar and all that. And the more I was down that rabbit hole, I'm like, does this thing even exist? Because there were so many allegories along the pathway where it was so much more spiritual than it was to me anyway. This is my commentary on it, right? I say you got to save your ass. I don't say expert in anything. So it was so much more started to be like, yo, the arc is like your that divinity, that finding that divine, that thing that works for you. Remember when we talked and I said that Ishta, like, there's no wrong way, you have that deity or that source that you find. Actually having faith, the simplicity of having faith in something is super powerful. It doesn't matter what it is, but if you're willing to go all in on something and really believe in it and have that confidence, that to me has always resonated as this idea of the arc, or as the idea of the Atma, of the lingam, right? It's, hey, this right here has to come here in a weird way, spiritual way. This is what happens when you go to a shit ton of temples. This happens. I mean, for me, anyway, this is where I'm coming from with it anyway. It's, the arc is, yeah, I love the story. I'm not discrediting any sort of biblical text, anything like that. But for me, and where I'm at with my own personal beliefs and stuff, that's what I associate it with, in a weird way, where I'm like, it's just this higher of being like faith. I really believe in something. I know that's probably not, I'm not conveying that completely to what I'm feeling when I say it, but that's kind of like my little take on it. It's like, maybe it's just be present.
Love it. Yeah, no, I'm just super curious. So what about you? What about you, Ike?
So as an archaeological artifact, it appears to have taken a primary place in the spiritual technology of communication between the high priest and of God, or Yahweh. It was their connection to him, right? The Ark of the Covenant. Covenant means what? Contract, agreement. And not only inside it were the tablets, but also the pot of manna, which was this kind of mysterious substance which the Hebrew people were enabled, they could digest it and eat it, and it kept them alive in their wanderings throughout the wilderness. Another thing, had to move around a lot because the ark was, they were wandering in the desert. And so they, they get the order to construct it from God, and they put, the tablets of the divine law in there. They have the pots of manna, which give them sustenance in their wanderings, and it's got these, sort of things traditionally that they're carrying it by, and it was literally their telephone to God. Because now I think, I personally happen to think that more along Drew's lines, where this is a potent spiritual sort of symbol here. This whole thing is a codified, somewhat veiled system of spirituality that kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier about the communion with the daimon, and it has parallels to alchemy, right? Because when God says, okay, so you've got the Ark of the Covenant, and it has its place in the tabernacle of the wilderness. That's kind of like this makeshift temple, and they don't have a real temple until the one gets built. I think it started under David and finished under Solomon. And then they have the Holy of Holies. It's not moving anymore. So, but they had the tabernacle in the wilderness. The tabernacle in the wilderness was, you walk up first. The high priest is the only person who could go back into the Holy of Holies. You walk up, you make a burnt offering. Then when he's done giving the burnt offering, he goes around to the laver of purification. It was made of brass, washed himself. Then and only then was he able to penetrate into the altar of incense inside the actual, and then that in there is the Holy of Holies. Now, the Holy of Holies is where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. And now in wrapping our heads around what God says about how it is to be constructed, it gives us a little bit of the symbolic purposes, or like whatever this was meant to communicate on a spiritual level. And I'll kind of go through it, everything that I just said, kind of the spiritual symbolism behind it. But very importantly, it was a process. Now, in esoteric interpretations, particularly by way of, occultism, the first place that the high priest went was the altar of burnt offering. Okay. And he sacrificed animals there. Why did he do that first? Because it was, and now this is, occult exegesis, but the tradition states that this was the offering up of the animal nature, of the self that is interested primarily with the natural world and natural things. The second part, once you have divested yourself of those things, next comes the purification. And we understand brass to be associated, have certain planetary correspondences for different people at different times. Then you are to wash and to be made pure, to be made holy. And then from there, incense is important, because incense, especially to the Hebrews, but just generally, the use for incense was twofold. Not just to make the place smell better, but because your prayers were thought to ascend with the incense. And so then that third step is prayer, devout prayer. And then he would pass into the Holy of Holies, or the altar of incense was actually in the Holy of Holies, and it was made of gold. And so the instructions that they get is make what's called, he calls the mercy seat. The mercy seat is like on top of the ark. It's like on top of the lid. And he says, you're going to make it, given certain dimensions, but it has to be pure gold. Right. So now we should be thinking alchemically, a la Zosimus of Panopolis and all of that other stuff. Pure gold. And then on either side of the mercy seat, you will make 2 cherubim of gold. Okay, reaching upward. And the esoteric exegesis of that is the masculine power and the feminine power, right? And being on either sides of that mercy seat. And then the final thing that God kind of delivers is like, this is where I'm going to talk to you. Right at the place between the 2 cherubim, right above the golden mercy seat. This is where I will communicate with you. And that has parallels to the entire initiatic process of coming to know your higher divine genius. That is what's going to talk to you. It's the process of how you get your higher divine genius to communicate with you as God's intermediary, because God cannot talk, right? God, if God is the brain of creation, the brain doesn't speak. It makes the mind speak. The brain doesn't run. It makes the legs run. It gives the commands, because the one, the ineffable source of all, it's the same thing. He also tells, and this is my own personal interpretation, I always viewed Aaron, Moses' brother, as like the exoteric, if we're talking about like the spiritual versus the persona, I always viewed Moses as like the spiritual center of the self, whereas Aaron, his brother, were like the outward face. And you know what God tells Moses about Aaron? He can never come in here without dying. And it's the same process. You cannot look upon the face of God and live. You must have an intermediary. The persona cannot enter into spiritual ventures. So there's powerful, powerful analogies throughout the Bible, particularly in Exodus and Genesis. And there's this really cool I got to get you the author, but there's this really good book on the Kabbalah of Exodus and Genesis, and I'll get that to you. But this is straight out of the Western initiatic mystery traditions, this whole exegesis here.
Damn,
That's
that's
beautifully said.
I'm glad I
Yeah.
asked. All right, I got one more for both of you. Because Ike had mentioned earlier this exotification of spirituality kind of coming from Blavatsky with these Eastern movements. Do you view that as something that has been beneficial? Like if you look at the effects that it has had or the way she has communicated things in her writings, um, do you find her style and her communication um, of benefit? Would you have done things differently? Do you think it's and maybe elaborate a little bit about what you mean by exotification too?
Well, I mean, I have my own criticisms, but I mean, let's face it, I'm nobody compared to like a Helena Blavatsky. She changed the world, and she worked hard. I mean, both her books were like over 500 pages, each. So she put in a lot of work. She also had one of those personalities, really was a cult of personality. When she died, it went on a completely different direction with Annie Besant and Charles Webster Leadbeater. But I think it needed to happen to bring us back to an appreciation. I feel like there was no way because of like what the Catholic Church did, what the Vatican did to essentially they buried all this stuff for so long and made it anathema and made it, heresy for so long that it created it stripped our perceptual filters of being able to understand what was in those writings. So even if we had, the volumes that the church that the Vatican keeps in its archives, or even if you read the Apocrypha, you couldn't understand it from a Western perspective. It had been too altered. It had been too exoterified and, aspects of it. And it was just too deep. You would need to be like, you need to have the mind of like a Thomas Aquinas to be able to understand this stuff, years ago, I think. And I think that, and I'm talking about lay people here, guys like us. But I think that Eastern spirituality opened us up to abstract thinking that was heavily discouraged by the Catholic Church. They were terrified of people's ability to think in abstract terms. Now, this is why we've gone wrong with Plato for fucking hundreds of years. People are reading these things as rational discourses. They're absurd. They're absurd. You read them, there's not an ounce of rationality in the actual discussion because he was trying to get to the point. You know what I mean? He's trying the telos of this dialogue is about, like, right, first Alcibiades, that'll go perfectly with what we're talking about. It's about self-knowledge. I'm not talking about self-knowledge, what's your favorite colors, what part of your back hurts, yeah, sometimes I'm a little bit of an asshole. Not that kind of self-knowledge. Self-knowledge of making the cosmic apology and saying, oh my God, I have only been pretending to know everything that I have claimed to know. So that's the telos of the dialogue. Never mind the fact that it's written from the perspective where Socrates is talking about how his diamond, he's delivering this thing to Alcibiades, who he loves, and he's saying like, listen, I waited years to tell you about this because my diamond has told me don't tell him about this. But now my diamond tells me that we can have this conversation. So he's talking about that kind of communication that we're exemplifying here. But the document itself is codified so as to represent or to symbolize Socrates as Alcibiades' diamond. So the tract itself shows you how the diamond communicates with you. So there's that codification, and it's all about self-knowledge. Now, if you're not ready to understand that, and you go about reading this document, you're gonna be like, this is fucking crazy. I don't know why I'm wasting my time. And we couldn't do that. We were having trouble doing that. And I think that, for all her faults and for all the really I guess, damage that has been done to real, true spiritual, although you can never really completely damage it because it's there when you're ready to understand it. But let's face it, like we've paraded our secrets in the mysteries through the streets, and it's some good has happened and some bad, and there's a lot of neutral in there. But regardless of all that stuff, I mean, it brought us back to a tradition that you needed to be able to think poetically and abstractly. Now, as to Drew's point earlier, we're being stripped more and more of the ability to admit the existence or the possibility of an underlying spiritual reason for anything, whether that's the pyramids or rituals or yoga, right? I don't need Raja yoga. This is fine. Look how far I can get my leg over my head. I'm great. I'm healthy. Like it's like, but I don't need Raja yoga. So, some of that happened, but I think that was the good thing. And also, more importantly, she created temporary autonomous zones, much in the way of a Masonic lodge, where we're all coming in on equal footing, men and women, and this is a curated space, a forum for us to be able to have these dialogues outside or away from the opinions of the profane. And she really, really created a beautiful worldwide network of that for men and women. There was a lot of bullshit, like that got pumped and filtered, but that's any spiritual messenger is always going to at least a little bit taint the message coming through because it has to come through their filter, so it's always, no matter who you are, it's always going to be tainted a little bit. But other than that, yeah, I mean, we could go on for hours. I'm interested to hear what Drew thinks.
Absolutely. What do you think, Drew?
I mean, to follow up with what I was just saying is it's so in lockstep with, anybody, for all the people who discredit, her work or where she took it from, blah, 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 blah. I get it. I get it, and I know Ike's heard that and we've all heard it, but like, as an artist myself, it's like, yeah, there's going to be things that influence you and but you have to find a way to create your own commentary on it. There has to be that. But I think, I know she created like hundreds of lodges, for her society all over the world. The unification that she was able to create with people and the things that came out of it are super positive in a lot of ways. Like the direction, I know we've talked so much about magic, black magic, white magic, all these things, but if you look at creating a space where there is equality and creating harmony, and I think maybe the intention will create harmony out of that. There could be some bad seeds. I get all that. That's just part of the experience, right? That's the human story. It's like you have to navigate those experiences. And I think through her work, she shared a lot of things that were completely foreign to everybody else, and the things for granted today with our access to information. You could any PDF, so many different books, you can read stuff, but 100 and God, that would have been 140 years ago at this point, somewhere around there, right? All this was kind of really blossoming. There was no access. So for somebody we look at society and we talk about men and women and how women this, I'm like, this woman put it all out there. So to me, I look at it as like, fuck, you had a lot of confidence. And there's something to take away from that. There's some sort of spirit that comes with confidence where you're like, pay attention to that, right? So read work and that and thinking back where women were at in society at that point and kind of some of those struggles and understanding that as best as I can from where we're at in history, it's pretty remarkable. And to be able to share that was, like it or love it, that takes a lot of strength. It takes the first step. There's no going back after mysticism, but when I think about the more spiritual you become, person, or what you want to call it, more where you are of where you're at in that moment in time. or you'll watch something, you start to examine, when you read somebody's work, you're like, what is going on in their head? It's like, yeah, I like the work, but what is behind the artist? Who is the artist? So it's very hard for artists to describe themselves, right? So when you read Blavatsky's work, there's a lot of art in it. There's a lot of, it's hard. It's a hard read. Ice Unveiled is a hard read for most people. I wouldn't, you know, it's going to take time. It's going to take some discipline. If you're interested in it, I'm not pushing anybody's work. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to create space where people think the way they want to think about these kind of but it's yeah, I just, I look at the artist when I read work, whether it's Plato, whether it's some of the stuff I'm really into. It's like I look at the emotion that's behind it. You know, there's something to it that has that thing. You know, but back to the first step. I remember what I was going to say. I always think about the first step of a journey. There's nothing actually beyond the first step of a journey. There is nothing beyond it because you've made the commitment on a journey to begin with. It doesn't matter where it leads to. You've made a commitment to yourself to do something. So when I read somebody's work like that, I'm like, I was committed to that journey. And it was like, fucking, I'm all out. And I watch Ike and the stuff that you guys are both doing and I'm kind of doing because I'm doing research and doing presentations. It's like, when you finally put yourself out there and take that first step, whether it's, you know, that left foot, right? I'm going to call it that weak side, you're a little bit scared, but there's something about it that once you take that step, it doesn't fucking matter anymore, right? So we can sit here and say whatever because it's like, hey, I had the confidence to fucking take that step to pick up a microphone and say this, or she had the confidence to sit down and write it and publish it out into the world, you know? So there's some power to that regardless. That's my little take.
Yeah,
Amen.
I think there's a lot of good points. I think there's a lot of, she did a lot of good stuff. Again, you know, there's some sort of, to me, I really think there was a spiritual impetus, a telos for the work that she did. But, you know, I mean, in terms of criticisms, a lot can be said in terms of, well, one thing that I want to point out is that Blavatsky admitted, and this isn't a criticism, it's just something I think that's interesting. Blavatsky admitted, you know, the fact of magic, you know, siddhis and stuff like that from the Vedic tradition. But she basically said, you know, don't even try it. Like, unless you're like an ascended master, like don't unless you're an adept, don't even try it. And I mean, I'm not talking about like today's standards of adept, because that's a buzzword now. That's like a bracket term that people throw around. Back then it was not, you know, but she didn't think that you should practice magic. And she also relocated, as I was saying, you know, the source of spiritual wisdom on this planet to the east. Although she talks about the Neoplatonists. And again, you know, here's the thing, right? A lot of the Neoplatonic stuff resulted from a, you know, Hellenistic discourse with Asiatic philosophies. They called Alexandria the city where East met West, and even Plotinus, the Neoplatonist, the guy who literally innovated Platonic philosophy to the point where they said, okay, this is something new now. You know, highly Eastern, you know, no ritual. It's all contemplative, you know, that kind of like Drew's saying, there's a bit of committing to the presence of the moment. And, you know, he took much more of an ascetic type of, but his philosophy is it resembles Buddhism and a lot of the early Vedic stuff. So there is that, you know, ultimately it is one planet and it is one tradition with many manifestations. But my point in all this is saying that she effectively created by dominating, you know, the spiritual discourse, not only in the West, but in the East. They had their headquarters. One of their headquarters were in Adyar, India. So what she did really was she kind of set the stage for guys like Mathis and Westcott to be like, we want to talk about magic and we want to talk about our Western traditions. This is great. We're going to use all this. I mean, if you don't have a firm handle on the Theosophical lexicon, you're not going to understand the flying rolls of the Inner Order of the Golden Dawn. they were using that language, you know, but they applied it to the study of Western esotericism and magic, etc. So that's kind of a cool thing. And then of course, you know, Sky, I've said it here a few times. It's an unfortunate consequence that she was very vocal about her ascended masters teaching and initiating and training her telepathically, because now that finds its, you know, inverted correlation to modern days like spirit guides and everybody thinking like you can be completely untrained. If I just burn a little sage and meditate 4 times, I now have spirit guides that I'm in communion with. Drew, I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, my bad. I said get your sage on.
Get your
Get your sage on, family.
Yeah.
Dude, sage has turned into like $1 million market, man, out here. And I'm not knocking sage, but
I'm all about the copal, personally.
what's up? Now you got to do the sage. You got to do your Palo Santo, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Palo Santo is the big one.
Smells
Well,
good. Smells good.
before we jump off, I want to ask you, Drew, a little bit more about what you're kind of currently working on, and maybe you can give, you know, some little tidbits
Yeah.
of interest.
So I know when you asked me earlier, I was like, just so in the, you know, we're talking about spirituality, so you go down that rabbit hole. Right now, I'm working on a big article that I will share with you guys off of this call, that I'm very excited about, and it's going to be a real new direction for me and my family, which I'm excited about. I'm still going to be actively doing the travel stuff. I'm planning. I'll be in Turkey at the end of summer, visiting some sites there, and then continuing projects in India, and then going to be back in Egypt, hopefully for Christmas is kind of the plan. I'm working on a book currently, so that has been ongoing for quite a while, as Ike, I know, is putting one out, and I put a poetry book last year or the year before. And, you know, when you're sending them to the editors and all that, it's like you want to make sure it's as authentic to your own self as possible, and it's process. But I'm just enjoying that and focusing on being a father, and that's also, in a crazy way, it's just writing up so much more, because now it's like you're watching the influence of, you know, the purity of a child and their existence, and that just spins everything. You're like, what was I thinking about years ago? Those kind of things. So working on just putting more art out into the world, and just continuing writing, photography, that kind of stuff. And travel company. Yeah. What's up?
Are you able to give any teasers about the book, or do you want to keep it on the DL for now, or?
The book, man, I've it's something that is so, as Ike, obviously you're putting out a piece and it's like, okay, once it's finished, it's like, here it is. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. But it's something that is very spiritual in context, which is a bit different, because my research over the last couple of years and doing lectures for different organizations has been very like temple based. I've to some spirituality, exploring that, creating dialogue where spirituality conversations can exist in and outside of organizations is super important to me. Like our conversation tonight, we're not part of any organization here. So creating that dialogue has kind of become more of my external art that I'm sharing, in a sense. So that's kind of what the book is going to be. It's going to be kind of trippy, but I'm excited to prepare and just kind of see where it goes. And to kind of know, like I said, I know Ike, you know, we're all, it's good to be delicate in your doings, if that makes sense. The intentions and all these things. And we're, you know, it's kind of like I said about living in the moment, being present. The book's going to be a lot about presence. And that sort of realm, just kind of some food for thought, you know. I think you notice people are kind of towards, you know, people that are more into exploring different things and different writing, and hope to be able to share it with whoever is interested. So there'll be more information on that. And then Ascension Excursions, my travel company, I'm going to be doing some stuff, some groups, getting a lot of a lot of people asking me about taking trips to India with me and stuff, which I'd love to do, but because of stuff I'm into, it's like I want to show you how to invoke a temple in a way where you as a normal person can go and just have an experience. And not about teaching them how to do it, it's about teaching them to just present. Not teaching, it's more so like, hey, you don't you don't need any of these things. Just go and explore this and let it explore you and see what the feedback is, because you get so much more out of watching somebody else's experience. I think the older I get, and especially with my son now, it's like I get to watch his experience in all these places. So being able to share that with other people, like-minded people, is a lot of fun. So there'll be more adventures in the future, and just yeah, that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thanks for coming on, man. It's a great conversation.
You guys are the best, man.
Yeah. I mean, this is a great. I feel like this is a great group, a great dynamic, and I'd be happy to talk with you again in the future, as I'm sure Sky will be.
Definitely have to do another one. This was awesome.
I think we covered so much stuff where it's actually, I'm like, it was a lot of fun. And you guys, last time we met, just seeing where the work that you both are doing individually and taking that first step and being able to be a part of just watching you guys' experience. And likewise, it's cool to be able to create dialogue with other men about things that are off limits to so many others. So I appreciate you guys, and I appreciate your friendship.
Appreciate you too, brother.
Appreciate it, man. Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, do you have any last words, Ike, before we sign out?
No.
All right. A man of few words. That's sarcasm. But all right. Well, appreciate you both. This was awesome. Definitely we'll have to do another one. And yeah, until next time.
Yeah.
Hey guys,
All right.
later.
Good night.